He just wanted to win the cooking contest to give his daughter a better life. But when the head judge tasted his simple dish, she didn't just see a contestant, she saw a man who reminded her of a past she'd spent a lifetime trying to forget, a past that would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the kitchen, air was thick with the scent of frying bacon and old coffee. The kind of smell that clung to the walls of the diner like a second coat of paint. Leo stood over the griddle, his movements a blur of practiced efficiency, his hands calloused from years of gripping hot pans and spatulas, danced over the sizzling surface, flipping pancakes, turning sausage links, and cracking eggs with a one-handed grace that came from a decade of breakfast rushes. He wasn't a chef, not in the way the world understood the word. He was a cook, a line cook, in a place with cracked vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since the 70s. But here in this small, greasy kingdom, he was king. He slid a perfectly golden omelet onto a plate, added a side of hash browns, and tapped the blanks to 70s, but iced tea. Small silver bell on the pass-through window with the back of his knuckles. The sound was a familiar punctuation mark in the symphony of his morning, a sound that meant one more customer, fed one more dollar toward rent, one more day. Survived. His daughter Maya sat in the corner booth, her legs swinging beneath the table, a stack of crayons and a paper placemat. Her only companions, she was 8 years old, with eyes that held the same quiet intensity as her father's. She didn't just see a cook, she saw a hero in a stained white apron. She was the reason he was here, the reason he woke up before the sun and came home smelling like grease and onions. She was the reason for the flyer he had folded and tucked into his back pocket, a brightly colored ad for the city's annual Golden Ladle cooking competition. The grand prize was enough money to change everything, enough to fix the leaky roof on their apartment, enough to buy Maya a new winter coat with a zipper that actually worked enough to maybe finally breathe. He glanced over at her. She held up her drawing, a smiling stick figure with a chef's hat towering over a mountain of pancakes. He smiled back, a genuine smile that momentarily erased the fatigue from his eyes. But the weight in his chest remained a constant, familiar pressure. It wasn't just about the money, it was about hope, the chance to prove that a man who made simple food with honest hands could be worth something more than his hourly wage. Behind the judging table, in a television studio miles away, a woman named Julianne Croft stared at a plate of deconstructed scallops with a saffron foam and felt nothing. She was the head judge, a culinary queenmaker whose opinion could launch a career or end one. Her palate was insured for $1 million. Her face was on the cover of food magazines, and her name was a brand synonymous with impeccable taste. But inside she was starving, not for food, for something real, something that didn't taste. Like ambition and desperation, she pushed the plate away, her expression unreadable. The other judges watched her, waiting for a verdict. She gave a slight shake of her head. "It's technically perfect," she said, her voice low and cool, and completely soulless. "Next." The producer's voice crackled through her earpiece. "We're moving on to the regional qualifiers, ma'am. Video submissions from the diner. Cooks and home chefs, the ones trying for the wildcard spot." Julianne leaned back in her chair, a flicker of something close to weariness in her eyes. She knew what she would see. More people trying to be something they weren't, more food trying to impress rather than nourish. But she nodded anyway. Bring them on. She thought maybe, just maybe, she'd find something that reminded her what food was supposed to be about in the first place. Leo wiped the cotton sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. The diner was finally quiet. The lunch rush, a frantic blur of shouted orders and clattering plates. Now, a fading memory. He leaned against the stainless steel counter and pulled the flyer from his pocket again. The golden ladle. The photo of the gleaming trophy seemed to mock him. What was he thinking? He cooked burgers and grilled cheese, not foie gras and truffle oil. But then he looked over at Maya, who was now carefully coloring in the lines of a new drawing, one of a little house with a garden and a big red door. She didn't see a line cook, she saw a man who could make magic out of eggs and flour. That was the only audience that had ever mattered. And maybe for once, that was enough. He took a deep breath, unfolded the application, and started to write his name. The decision felt like a leap of faith, a quiet prayer sent up from a greasy kitchen in a forgotten corner of the city. He had no idea that the woman who would read it was just as hungry for something real as he was. The application form felt foreign in Leo's hands. Its glossy paper, a stark contrast to the worn-out order pads he was used to. The questions were designed for chefs, with pedigrees, culinary school specializations, a list of prestigious restaurants he left. Most of the boxes blank under culinary philosophy. He hesitated for a long moment, then wrote a single sentence. Food should make you feel safe. He folded the paper, slid it into an envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox on his way home. That night, not with hope, but with a kind of quiet surrender, as if he were casting a message in a bottle into an ocean of stainless steel and celebrity. Endorsements. He didn't tell Maya he'd entered. He didn't want to build her hopes up on a foundation so fragile it might shatter. With the first rejection, a week later, he got the email. A generic subject line. Golden ladle. Competition. Update. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened it, expecting a polite, "Thank you but no." Instead he read the words, "Your preliminary video submission has been accepted. You will compete in the regional qualifier this Saturday, please. Arrive at the Union Event Center, no later than 8 a.m. He stared at the screen for a solid minute, the words blurring slightly. He had to make a video submission for the preliminary round. He had filmed it on his old phone, propped up on a sick-a-day stack of cookbooks in his tiny apartment kitchen. He hadn't made anything fancy. He'd made what he made for Maya on Sunday mornings, a simple bowl of oatmeal with caramelized apples and a sprinkle of cinnamon, a dish born not of ambition, but of love and necessity. When he told Maya, she squealed with a joy so pure, it momentarily washed away all of his doubt. "You're going to win, Daddy," she'd said, hugging his legs tightly. "You make the best food in the whole world," Leo knew. He didn't. He knew he was out of his league, a rowboat in a sea of yachts, but her belief was a shield, and he held it close. As he walked into the gleaming chaos of the event center, on Saturday, the air inside the Union Event Center buzzed with a nervous energy that was thick enough to taste it, smelled of citrus zest and searing meat and something else. Something like fear. Hundreds of contestants milled around in crisp white coats, their faces a mixture of forced confidence and raw panic. They carried expensive knife rolls and whispered about sous vide techniques and molecular gastronomy. Leo felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He wore his diner uniform clean, but faded at the collar. His only knife was a well-loved chef's knife, with a handle worn smooth. From years of use, he found his assigned station, a small stainless steel table at the far end of the room, and set down his meager box of ingredients. The man at the station next to him, a chef with a precisely trimmed goatee and a sneer that seemed to be a permanent fixture on his face, glanced at Leo's setup and chuckled softly. "You lost, little fella. The home ec bake-off is next door." Leo didn't respond. He just took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. The first challenge was simple. In theory, create a dish that tells a story in 60 minutes. The theme was beginnings. The rival chef started plating a delicate quail egg on a bed of microgreens with a balsamic reduction that spelled out the word Genesis. Leo pulled out a bag of potatoes. He peeled them with steady hands, his mind quieting as the rhythm of the work took over. He wasn't thinking about the rival and prize money anymore. He was thinking about the first meal he'd ever cooked for Maya, after her mother was gone, a simple potato soup, warm, thick, and nourishing. It was all he'd had in the pantry that day, but it had been enough. It had been safe. When the time was called, Leo's bowl looked painfully plain next to the architectural marvels on the tables around him. It was just soup, creamy white with a sprinkle of chives and a single drop of olive oil. The judges moved down the line, their faces impassive. When they reached his station, the goateed chef snorted with derision. Julianne Croft picked up the spoon, her expression giving nothing away. She lifted it to her lips and tasted. The room was silent. The other judges watched her, waiting for her signal. She closed her eyes for a single heartbeat. And in that moment, she wasn't in a sterile event center. She was 6 years old, huddled in a cold apartment, her stomach a hollow ache, her mother handing her a small cup of something warm, something that tasted of comfort and survival and hope. She opened her eyes and looked at Leo. Really looked at him for the first time. His hands were calloused, his eyes were tired, but his dish had a soul. "What is this called?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Leo swallowed. "It's just potato soup." "No," she said, setting the spoon down gently. "It's a memory." And with that, she marked a single check on her scorecard and moved. On leaving the other judges and a stunned line cook, wondering what on earth had just happened, the murmurs that followed Julianne's verdict rippled through the contestant pool like a shockwave. The goateed chef stared at Leo with a mixture of disbelief and contempt, as if the laws of the culinary universe had just been flagrantly violated. "Potato soup," he muttered to the contestant on his other side. A woman with a severe haircut and an equally severe expression. She made it through with potato soup. The woman sniffed disdainfully. "It's a pity vote. They always let one sob story through for the cameras." Leo heard them, but he pretended he didn't. He cleaned his station with meticulous care, his hands moving with the same steady rhythm he used at the diner. It was the only thing that kept the shaking at bay. He didn't understand what had happened. He'd expected to be dismissed, laughed at, sent home. He hadn't expected to be seen, especially not by her. Julianne Croft was a legend, a ghost in the machine of the food world. Her critiques were famously precise and mercilessly honest. She didn't deal in pity or sentiment. He packed his knife away, the worn leather sheath a familiar comfort. In his hands, he felt a presence beside him and looked up. Julianne stood there, her arms crossed, her expression still unreadable. "That was a brave choice," she said. Her voice low, meant only for him. Leo frowned. "It was just soup." "No, it wasn't," she replied. "It was honest. Most people here are trying to cook for me. You were cooking for someone else." She held his gaze for a moment longer, a flicker of something he couldn't name, passing through her eyes. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of producers and camera operators. Leo stood there for a long time, the scent of his own simple soup still lingering in the air. He had come here to win money, to fix a roof, to buy a coat, but now something else was taking root, something more complicated and far more terrifying. He had been noticed by the one person who saw everything, and he had a feeling that this was only the beginning. As the competition moved into its second week, the pressure mounted. The challenges grew more esoteric, more designed for television than for actual cooking. Create a dish inspired by a forgotten song. Transform a single vegetable into 3 distinct textures. Build a dessert that represents the concept of irony. Leo watched as other chefs pulled out smoke guns and foam canisters and liquid nitrogen. He stuck to what he knew: heat, salt, fat, and time. He made a simple roasted carrot soup, a pan-seared piece of fish with lemon and herbs, rustic apple tart with a hand-rolled crust. Each time the other contestants scoffed. Each time the other 2 judges, a portly man with a booming voice and a thin woman who spoke only in superlatives, looked at his plate with thinly veiled disappointment. And each time Julianne would taste his food, her expression unreadable, and she would find something to praise. Not the technique, not the presentation, but the feeling. "The flavor is clean," she'd say. "It's balanced. It tastes like it was made with purpose. Her quiet endorsements were enough to keep him in the running, but they also made him a target. The goateed chef, whose name was Marcus, had made it his personal mission to get under Leo's skin. He'd make snide comments just loud enough for Leo to hear, "Can't wait to see what peasant food he whips up today." Or, "I guess if you can't compete on skill, you compete on sympathy." Leo ignored him, focusing on his work, on the memory of Maya's smile, on the steady rhythm of his knife against the cutting board. But it was getting harder to block out the noise. The cameras were always on him. Now the producers asking him leading questions about his life as a single dad, about his struggles. He answered vaguely, politely. But he felt like a specimen under a microscope, a character being crafted for a narrative he didn't control one evening. After a particularly grueling challenge, he was packing up his station when Julianne approached him again. She waited until the cameras had moved, on her presence, a pocket of stillness in the surrounding chaos. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly. "Who?" Leo asked, though he knew exactly who she'd meant Marcus, the other. "Judges, the producers. They're looking for a story. You're just here to cook." He looked down at his hands, stained with beet juice and grease. "I don't belong here." "You belong here more than any of them," she said, with a certainty that startled him. "They're cooking to win. You're cooking to nourish. There's a difference." She paused, then added, her voice softer, "Don't forget why you started." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him. With her words hanging in the air, he watched her go, her posture perfect, her steps measured. She was an enigma, a woman who lived in a world of Michelin stars and billion-dollar endorsements. Yet, she saw something in his simple food that no one else did. And Leo was beginning to realize that the most frightening thing about this competition wasn't the fear of losing, it was the fear of what he might find if he stayed. Julianne sat in the back of her chauffeured sedan, the city lights blurring into long streaks of neon and gold. A leather-bound portfolio of restaurant investment proposals sat unopened on the ray seat beside her. Her phone buzzed with notifications, emails from her assistant, texts from real estate agents, reminders of a life that felt increasingly distant and hollow. She stared out the window, her reflection, a faint ghost superimposed. Over the glittering skyline, all she could think about was the taste of that soup, the clean, honest flavor of potato and salt, a taste that had transported her back to a place she'd spent her entire adult life trying to outrun. She had grown up in a series of faded one-bedroom apartments, the kind with peeling paint and windows that rattled in the wind. Her mother, a woman with tired eyes and a fierce love, had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. But there were nights when the cupboards were bare, when the only thing to eat was a watery soup made from a single potato and a bouillon cube. Her mother would serve it in their one good teacup, telling her it was a special magic potion to make her strong. Julianne would drink it slowly, savoring every drop, pretending it was the most delicious thing in the world, because she knew it was made of love. The only ingredient they always had in abundance. When she tasted Leo's soup, it wasn't just a memory. It was a validation, a reminder that nourishment wasn't about expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. It was about care. It was about intention. It was about making someone feel safe. She had built an empire on the architecture of food, on its presentation, its novelty, its marketability, but she had forgotten its soul. Leo hadn't forgotten his food was grounded in something real, something she had lost along the way. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool leather of the seat. She was the most powerful woman in the culinary world, yet she felt a desperate envy for a line cook from a greasy spoon diner, because he had something all her money and accolades couldn't buy. He knew how to feed a person's heart. The next challenge was a team challenge. The remaining contestants were split into pairs and tasked with creating a cohesive 3-course meal. Leo was paired with a young pastry chef named Chloe, a woman With wide, nervous eyes and hands that trembled whenever a camera was pointed at her, Marcus, of course, was paired with the severe-looking woman. And their station was a model of cold, silent efficiency from the start. It was clear Leo and Chloe were the underdogs. Chloe specialized in delicate spun sugar creations and intricate desserts. She looked at the basket of savory ingredients, whole chicken root vegetables, and a selection of fresh herbs with undisguised panic. "I don't do savory," she whispered to Leo, her face pale. "I burn everything that isn't a cake." Leo gave her a calm, reassuring nod. "It's okay. We'll figure it out. You handle the dessert. I'll take care of the rest. Just tell me what you need." For the next 2 hours, they worked in a quiet harmony that stood in stark contrast to the tense bickering at the other stations. Leo broke down the chicken with practiced ease, roasting the breast and using the rest for a rich, flavorful broth, guided Chloe through chopping vegetables, showing her how to season the soup without overpowering it. She in turn found her confidence in the dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart with a basil-infused syrup that was both daring and perfectly balanced. When it came time for judging, Marcus presented his team's meal with a flourish, a technically flawless but sterile trio of dishes. Then it was Leo and Chloe's turn. Their food was simple: roasted chicken with root vegetables, a clear chicken broth with handmade noodles, and Chloe's lemon tart. The two main judges were unimpressed. "It's homey," the portly one said with a shrug. "But is it competition-worthy?" Julianne tasted each component. Slowly she took a sip of the broth and paused, her expression unreadable. "This broth," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the studio, "it tastes like it was made by someone who understands that nothing should be wasted. It's not just an ingredient, it's a philosophy." She then turned to Chloe. "And this dessert, the combination of lemon and basil, is unexpected and brilliant. You took a risk, and it paid off." She looked back and forth between Leo and Chloe. "This is the first meal I've seen today that feels like it was made by a team, not two individuals competing for the spotlight. You listened to each other, you supported each other, and the result is a meal that is not only delicious but also has heart." They were declared the winners of the challenge. Chloe burst into tears of relief and hugged Leo tightly. Marcus stared at them, his jaw clenched in disbelief, as Leo packed his knives away. That evening, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride, not just in his cooking, but in his ability to connect with someone to help them find their footing. It was the same feeling he got when he taught Maya how to tie her shoes or ride a bike. It was the feeling of being a father, a partner, a person who could build something good with someone else. He glanced over at Julianne, who was talking to a producer, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. She was the reason they had won. He knew that she had seen what the others had missed. She had understood the story they were trying to tell with their food. And as he watched her, he realized his fear was slowly being replaced by something else. Something that felt dangerously like admiration. Maya's visits to the set were a whirlwind of pure, unfiltered joy. The producers had arranged for her to come on weekends, a calculated move to capture more of the struggling single dad narrative. But Leo didn't care about their motives. He just cared about seeing her face light up. When she walked into the studio, she would run to him, her arms outstretched, burying her face in his apron. Her presence was a grounding force, a reminder of the real world. Beyond the Klieg lights and artificial drama, she wasn't impressed by the cameras or the celebrity judges. She was impressed by the walk-in freezer and the endless supply of chocolate chips in the pantry one Saturday afternoon. While Leo, they was busy prepping for the next challenge. Maya wandered off her sketchbook and a fistful of crayons in hand. She found a quiet corner behind a stack of lighting equipment and started to draw. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice Julianne approaching, until she was standing right beside her. Julianne had been watching from a distance, a quiet ache in her chest. She saw in Maya a reflection of the little girl. She used to be a child finding solace in a world of her own making. She knelt down, her movements slow and careful not to startle her. "What are you drawing?" she asked softly. Maya looked up, her eyes wide and curious. "It's a picture of my dad's restaurant," she said, holding up the paper. "The one we're going to have when he wins." The drawing was simple but full of detail. A small building with a red door, a sign that read "Leo's Place," and a garden out front with giant smiling sunflowers in the doorway was a stick figure of Leo, holding a plate, and beside him a stick figure of Maya holding his hand. Julianne smiled. "It's beautiful. I love the sunflowers." "They're my favorite," Maya said. "My dad says they always know how to find light." Julianne's smile faltered. For a second, that simple, childish observation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had spent so long in the shadows, she'd forgotten what it felt like to turn toward the sun. "Your dad is a very special person, you know." "That," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. Maya nodded solemnly. "He's the best. He makes everything better just by being there." She looked down at her drawing, then back up at Julianne. "Do you want to be in the picture?" she asked, holding out a brown crayon. "There's room right here next to us." Julianne stared at the small space on the paper beside the stick figures of Leo and Maya, an invitation into a world of warmth and belonging, a world she felt she had no right to enter. She couldn't speak, her throat suddenly tight with unshed tears. She simply nodded, and Maya, with the unthinking grace of a child, began to draw a new figure into her world, one with a kind smile and a place in the sun. Quarterfinals loomed, and the theme was "A Dish That Defines You." The contestants were given a blank check, an unlimited pantry, and 2 hours to create the one plate that encapsulated their entire culinary identity. It was a test of vision, not just skill. Marcus immediately began planning an elaborate dish involving lobster, foam, and gold leaf, a monument to his own ego. The other remaining chefs followed suit, their stations quickly becoming a flurry of complex techniques and expensive ingredients. Leo stood at his station for a long time, his mind quiet. He wasn't thinking about what would impress the judges. He was thinking about what defined him, and the answer was simple: Maya. He pulled out a cast-iron skillet, some flour, butter, milk, and a block of sharp cheddar cheese. He was going to make macaroni and cheese. The whispers started almost immediately. "Is he serious?" one chef muttered to another. "He's throwing in the towel." Marcus laughed out loud, a harsh grating sound. "The line cook is making a children's birthday party dish. This is pathetic." Leo ignored them. His hands moved with a familiar, steady rhythm. He made a bechamel sauce from scratch, whisking it until it was smooth and creamy. He grated the cheese by hand, letting it melt slowly into the sauce, creating a velvety texture. He cooked the pasta al dente, then folded it all together and poured it into a simple ceramic bowl. He topped it with toasted breadcrumbs, made from day-old bread from the diner. A touch of nostalgia, a nod to his philosophy of not wasting anything. As he worked, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. He wasn't cooking for the competition anymore. He was cooking for his daughter. He was putting his love for her on a plate. And if the judges didn't understand that, then he didn't want to win anyway. When he presented his dish, the other judges looked at it with open contempt. The portly one poked it with his fork. "Macaroni and cheese, really, Leo? This is the quarterfinals." Julianne said nothing. She picked up her fork, took a bite, and closed her eyes. The Loder Vination flavor was rich and complex, the sharpness of the cheddar balanced by the creaminess of the sauce, the toasted breadcrumbs adding a perfect crunch. But it was more than that. It was the taste of home, the taste of safety, the taste of a father's bed and unwavering love. It was the most honest dish she had tasted in years. She opened her eyes and looked at the other judges, their faces a mask of culinary snobbery. "You see a simple dish," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I see. Courage. This is a dish that has nothing to hide. It's not trying to be something, it's unapologetically itself." She turned to Leo. "And it's delicious." She pushed her plate forward. He moves on to the semi-finals. The studio erupted in a buzz of shocked conversation. Marcus stared at Leo, his face a thundercloud of fury. But Leo was looking at Julianne, and in her eyes he saw, not a judge, but an ally, a kindred spirit, a woman who understood the language he spoke. With food. And for the first time he allowed himself to wonder if maybe they were telling the same story. After all, the fallout from the quarterfinals was immediate. The show's online forums and social media pages exploded with debate. Half the viewers lauded Julianne for her bold decision, praising her for championing real food over pretentious gastronomy. The other half accused her of favoritism, of rigging the competition for the sake of a compelling narrative. The producers, of course, were ecstatic. The controversy was a ratings goldmine. They leaned into it, hard-cutting together, promos that juxtaposed Marcus's technical prowess with Leo's humble backstory. They painted it as a clash of culinary worlds. The elite versus the everyman. Leo tried to ignore it all. He spent his time between challenges with Maya, going for walks in the park, reading books, and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But the bubble of the competition was hard to escape. People started recognizing him on the street, asking for selfies, or offering unsolicited advice on his cooking. He was becoming a character in a story he no longer controlled, and it unnerved him. Julianne was also feeling the heat. The network executives had called her into a meeting, questioning her judgment and reminding her of the show's brand. "We're about excellence, Julianne, not sentiment," the head of the network, a man with a smile as slick as his hair, had said. "People tune in to see high-end cooking, not something they can make at home on a Tuesday night." Julianne had listened patiently, her hands folded calmly on the polished mahogany table. "With all due respect," she'd replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're confusing excellence with elitism. This show has forgotten that the best food in the world isn't about how much it costs, it's about how it makes you feel. Leo's food makes you feel something. His cooking has more integrity in one spoonful than most of these chefs have in their entire careers." She stood up, ending the meeting on her own terms. "If you want a judge who values spectacle over substance, you can find someone else, but as long as I'm here, I will vote for the food that deserves to win." She walked out, leaving a room full of stunned executives in her wake. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, risking her reputation, her career. But she didn't care. She had spent too long living a life that was technically perfect and completely soulless. Leo's cooking had reminded her of who she used to be, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Not anymore. That evening, she found Leo sitting alone in the studio's small green room, staring at a blank wall. He looked tired, the weight of the past few weeks etched on his face. She sat down beside him, not saying anything for a long time. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. He shrugged. "I feel like I'm drowning a little," he admitted, his voice low. "This whole thing has gotten so big, I don't know how to be the person they want me to be." "Then don't," she said simply. "Be the person you are. That's the one who got you here." He looked at her, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "You're taking a lot of heat for me," he said. "I know," she replied. "It's worth it." And in the set quiet of that small room, something shifted between them, a silent understanding, a shared sense of purpose, a bond forged in the heat of a kitchen and the glare of television lights. It was no longer just about the competition, it was about something more, something real, something that was starting to feel a lot like hope. The semifinals challenge was the most daunting, yet the remaining three contestants, Leo, Marcus, and the severe-looking woman named Estelle, were tasked with creating an entire menu for a pop-up restaurant. They would have to design the concept, cook the food, and serve a room full of discerning food critics and investors. It was a test of everything: cooking, business, acumen, and grace under pressure. Marcus immediately launched into a concept for an exclusive high-end establishment he called Ephemeral, featuring a 12-course tasting menu of microscopic portions and vaporized sauces. Estelle's concept was a stark, minimalist eatery called Essence, where each dish would focus on a single ingredient cooked in its purest form. Leo knew he couldn't compete on that level. He didn't have the training, the staff, or the desire to create something so cold and conceptual, so he went back to what he knew. He designed a concept for a small, cozy restaurant called The Hearth. The menu was simple and comforting, a modern take on the diner food he cooked every day, but elevated with fresh local ingredients and careful technique. There would be a gourmet grilled cheese with artisanal bread, and a tomato soup infused with roasted garlic, a shepherd's pie with a root vegetable mash and a rich lamb gravy, and for dessert, a warm apple crumble with a scoop of homemade vanilla bean ice cream. It was a risky move, a direct challenge to the very definition of fine dining. But it was honest. It was him. On the night of the pop-up, Leo's restaurant was a stark contrast to the others, while Ephemeral and Essence were sleek and modern, with cold lighting and hushed atmospheres. The Hearth was warm and inviting. The tables were made of reclaimed wood. There were mismatched chairs and small jars of wildflowers on each table. The air smelled of roasting, garlic, and baking apples. It felt like coming home. The critics and investors were initially skeptical. They walked in their expressions, a mixture of curiosity and condescension. But as the food started to come out, a change began to ripple through the resonous room. They tasted the soup, and their faces softened. They bit into the grilled cheese, and they smiled. They ate the shepherd's pie, and they started to talk to each other, to laugh. They weren't just eating, they were connecting. Julianne walked through the room, observing it all. She saw Marcus schmoozing with investors, his smile as artificial as his food. She saw Estelle explaining her concept with a cold intellectual detachment, and then she saw Leo in his small open kitchen, his brow furrowed in concentration, his movements efficient and calm. He wasn't performing, he was cooking, he was nourishing, he was creating a space where people felt safe and welcome. At the end of the night, the verdict was clear. While Marcus's restaurant had been a technical masterpiece, and Estelle's had been an intellectual exercise, Leo's had been a triumph of the heart. He had won the semifinals and secured his place in the final showdown as he cleaned his station. Late that night, exhausted but exhilarated, Julianne approached him. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "A toast," she said, handing one to him, "to the man who reminded an entire city what it means to eat with your heart." They clinked glasses, the sound small but resonant in the quiet studio. "I couldn't have done it without you," Leo said, his voice full of a gratitude that went far beyond the competition. "Yes, you could have," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "You just needed to believe it." And as they stood there, sharing a quiet moment of victory, Leo realized that the prize money was no longer the most valuable thing he could win. The article dropped the morning of the final round. It was a brutal, elegantly written exposé in a major news publication titled "The Bitter Taste of Success: The Secret History of Julianne Croft." The piece detailed her impoverished childhood with a ruthless precision. It painted her mother not as a graxo, loving, struggling woman, but as neglectful and incompetent. It described their tiny apartments, their bare cupboards, their reliance on food banks. It even included an interview with a disgruntled former employee of the show who claimed that Julianne's support of Leo was a calculated publicity stunt, a way to craft a more relatable rags-to-riches narrative for herself. The story was a masterpiece of character assassination, and it went viral within minutes. When Leo saw it, his world tilted on its axis. He was sitting in the green room trying to calm his nerves before the biggest cook of his life, when one of the producers showed him the article on their phone. He read it once, then twice, the words blurring into a nauseating haze. He felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. It wasn't the revelation of her past that shocked him, it was the implication that he was a pawn in her game, that his story, his daughter, his honest cooking, had all been co-opted for her personal brand. He thought back on all their interactions, her quiet encouragement, her unwavering support, her aha moments of seeing something special in him. Had it all been a performance, a carefully orchestrated scene for a story? She was writing in her own head. The trust he had, so cautiously started to build, crumbled into dust. He felt like a fool, used and exposed. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists. The producer looked at him with a predatory gleam in his eye. "So, Leo, any comment on your relationship with the judge?" Leo pushed past him without a word and walked out of the green room. He needed air. He needed to think. But all he could feel was the sting of betrayal. He found Julianne in her private dressing room. She was standing by the window, staring out at the city, her back to the door. She looked small and fragile, her usual armor of tailored suits and perfect posture gone. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremble in her hands. She turned when he entered. Her eyes were red-rimmed but defiant. "You saw it," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I saw it," he replied, his own voice, flat and cold. He held up the phone with the article displayed on the screen. "Is it true?" "The part about my childhood, yes," she said. "The part about you, no." He took a step closer, his anger a low burn in his chest. "How? Am I supposed to believe that you've been pushing me through this whole competition, championing the underdog, telling me I'm the only one who's real? Was that all for the cameras, Julianne? Was it all just part of your story?" "No," she said, her voice cracking. "It was because you reminded me of what I lost. It was because your food was the first thing in years that felt honest. It had nothing to do with a story, and everything to do with you." "I don't know if I can believe you," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I feel like I've been played like my life. My daughter has been used as a prop for your comeback tour." He saw the look of pure devastation on her face, and for a moment his anger faltered, but the hurt was too deep. He turned to leave. "Leo, please," she whispered. "Don't let them do this to us." "They already have," he said without looking back, and he walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of what they had almost built. The final challenge was simple and brutal. Cook one dish, the dish of your life, the one that tells the world who you are. The studio was electric with tension. The audience buzzed with whispers about the article about Leo and Julianne. The air was thick with drama and the smell of fear. Leo stood at his station, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He felt betrayed, angry, humiliated. He wanted to walk away, to take Maya and disappear back into the quiet anonymity of his life. But then, he thought of his daughter's face, her unwavering belief in him. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself, to her. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let their lies and their narrative silence him. So he took a deep breath and began to cook. Marcus was on the other side of the kitchen, a whirlwind of arrogant energy. He was creating a dish of impossible complexity, a deconstructed bouillabaisse with 15 different components, each requiring a different technique. It was a dish designed to scream, "I am a culinary genius." Leo ignored him. He pulled out a simple pot, a bag of flour, and a handful of wild mushrooms. He was going to make gnocchi, a dish his wife used to love, a dish he hadn't made since she died. It was a dish of grief, of memory, of love that endured beyond loss. It was the most personal dish he could imagine. As he worked, the noise of the studio faded away. He rolled the dough with gentle hands. His one sibio vod, thoughts turning to his wife. her laughter the way she used to steal bites of the raw dough. He was a man, not just a cook, not just a single dad, not just a character in a reality show. He was a man who had loved and lost and kept going for the raw dough. Sake of his daughter, he was a man who found solace and meaning in the simple act of feeding someone he loved. He finished the dish with a simple brown butter and sage sauce and a sprinkle of Parmesan cheese. It was plain, unadorned, and achingly beautiful. It was his heart on a plate. When it was time for tasting, Leo presented his dish to the judges with a quiet dignity. He didn't explain its backstory. He didn't offer any sentimental anecdotes. He just let the food speak for itself. The two male judges tasted it, their expressions shifting from skepticism to surprise to a kind of quiet reverence. It was delicious, perfectly cooked, deeply flavorful, but it was more than that. It was food that told a story. Then it was Julianne's turn. Her hands were trembling as she picked up the fork. She looked at Leo, her eyes full of 1,000 unspoken words. She took a bite, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. That wasn't tasting gnocchi. She was tasting love and loss, and the resilient strength of the human heart. She was tasting her own story, reflected in his. And in that moment she knew that their connection was real, undeniable, and worth fighting. For the room held its breath, waiting for the final verdict. Julianne looked from Leo's plate to Marcus's, an intricate but soulless piece of culinary architecture. She looked at the expectant faces of the judges, the producers, the audience. She looked at Leo, who stood tall and unwavering, his integrity, a silent rebuke to the circus around them. She took a deep breath and made her choice. The winner of the Golden Ladle competition, the host's voice boomed through the studio, is a chef who has shown us that the most powerful ingredient in any dish is not technique or luxury, but love. The winner is Leo. The studio erupted in applause. Confetti rained down from the ceiling, and Maya rushed onto the stage, her face a playing blur of tears and joy. She threw her arms around her father's waist, and he lifted her up, holding her tight. As the cameras flashed around them, Leo looked over at Julianne through the storm of confetti and flashing lights. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile of relief, of pride, of a shared victory. He knew in that moment that their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. After the show ended, life did not magically transform into a fairy tale. The prize money was real. It fixed the leaky roof. It bought a new winter coat for Maya, and it paid off the mountain of bills that had been suffocating Leo for years. But the glare of the spotlight did not fade overnight. Leo was inundated with offers to host his own cooking show, to endorse products, to become a celebrity chef. He turned them all down. He didn't want to be a brand, he just wanted to be a cook. He used a portion of the prize money to buy the small, defunct bakery next to his old diner. He spent months renovating it himself, tearing down walls, sanding floors, and building tables out of reclaimed wood. He called it the Hearth, just like his pop-up restaurant. It was a small, cozy space with an open kitchen and a menu of simple, honest food made with love. Julianne also made changes. She resigned as the head judge of the Golden Ladle and stepped back from the public eye. She used her considerable wealth and influence to start a foundation dedicated to funding community gardens and culinary education programs in underserved neighborhoods. She wanted to use food not as a tool for entertainment, but as a tool for connection and nourishment. She and Leo did not rush into a relationship. They took it slow. They built their new lives separately, but in parallel, they talked on the phone late at night, sharing their fears and their dreams. They met for coffee in quiet cafes, far from the prying eyes of the press. Maya was their bridge, their constant reminder of what was real and true. She would spend weekends at the hearth, helping her dad in the kitchen, and telling Julianne stories about her week at school. She had accepted Julianne into her life with the simple, unquestioning love of a child, and her acceptance helped heal the rift between the two adults. One rainy afternoon, Julianne showed up at the hearth, unannounced. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked relaxed, happy more herself than Leo had ever seen her. She walked into the kitchen where he was kneading bread dough and simply stood there watching him. He looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're covered in flour," he said. "I know," she replied, stepping closer. "I was hoping you could teach me how to make something real." He wiped his hands on his apron and reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I think we can figure it out together," he said. And in the warm quiet of that small kitchen, surrounded by the scent of baking bread and the promise of a shared future, they finally began to build the life they had both been so hungry for. The hearth had. "I've been open for a year, and it was more than just a restaurant. It had become the heart of the neighborhood, a place where people came not just to eat but to connect, to feel safe, to be nourished. The tables were always full, the air always thick with the sound of laughter and the smell of good food. Leo was in the kitchen, his hands moving with the familiar grace of a man who had found his purpose. He was no longer just a cook, he was a chef, a business owner, a pillar of his community. But his greatest joy was still the simple act of feeding the people he loved. Maya, now 9 years old, would often do her homework at the corner table, her sketchbook filled with new drawings of the restaurant and its patrons. She had a new favorite subject to draw: Julianne, who was now a constant presence at the hearth. Julianne had found her own purpose, not in boardrooms or on television, but in the quiet work of her foundation. She spent her days visiting schools, helping to plant gardens and teaching kids about the power of real food. But she always ended her day at the hearth. She would sit at the counter watching Leo cook, a quiet contentment on her face she had shed the armor of her past, and embrace the messy, beautiful reality of her present. One evening, after the last customer had left and the restaurant was quiet, Leo and Julianne were cleaning the kitchen together. Maya was asleep on a small cot. They kept in the office, her breathing soft and steady. They worked in a comfortable silence, their movements a synchronized dance of two people who knew each other's rhythms perfectly. Leo washed the dishes and Julianne dried them, stacking them carefully on the shelf. "I was thinking about that first day," Leo said, his voice low. "The potato soup," Julianne smiled. "I think about it all the time. I never thought that a bowl of soup could change my life," he said, turning to face her. "It didn't change your life," she replied, stepping closer. "It just reminded you of the life you were already living." She reached up and wiped a smudge of flour from his cheek, her touch gentle and familiar. "You were the one who changed my life, Leo. You reminded me how to be hungry for the right things." He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. "I love you," he whispered the words, feeling as natural and necessary as breathing. "I love you, too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the warm glow of the kitchen lights outside the city, buzzed with its endless noise and ambition. But inside the hearth they had built a world of their own, a world founded on the simple truth that the best meals are the ones shared with the people you love. It was a world that was technically imperfect and completely full of soul, and it was more than enough. The fire in the small hearth crackled warmly, sending dancing shadows across the wooden beams of the ceiling. The restaurant was closed for the night, the chairs stacked on the tables, the floors swept clean, but a single table remained set near the fire, laid with 2 simple ceramic plates and a small vase of wildflowers from the garden. Out back, Leo and Julianne sat across from each other. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that needs no words to be understood. It had been 5 years since the Betrayal competition. 5 years since a bowl of soup had changed the trajectory of their lives. The hearth was a thriving success, a testament to the power of honest food and community. Maya was a teenager, now her drawings more sophisticated, her laughter still the brightest sound in the room. She was upstairs in their small apartment above the restaurant, probably listening to music too loud, and dreaming of her own future. Leo reached across the table and took Julianne's hand. His touch was still the same, steady and reassuring. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, The old life, the glamour, the noise. Julianne looked into the flames, her eyes soft and reflective. "Sometimes I miss the shoes," she said, with a small laugh. "But no, I don't miss the life. I was a ghost in that world. I was playing a part here." She squeezed his hand. "Here I'm real." He smiled. That slow, easy smile that still made her heart ache. "You were always real, Julianne, you just forgot how to see it." She looked at him, her love for him, a tangible thing, a warmth that spread through her chest. "It was you who helped me remember you, and your potato soup," he chuckled softly. "It was just a few potatoes and some salt." "It was hope in a bowl," she said, her voice serious. "It was everything I had been starving for." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire, a symbol of the life they had built together, a life of warmth, nourishment, and unwavering love. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still struggles, there were still moments of doubt, but they faced them together, hand in hand, their love a steady flame in the hearth of their shared world, and they knew as long as they had each other, they would always be home. The restaurant was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon, the lull between the lunch rush and the dinner prep filling the space with a sleepy golden light. Leo was in the back, ordering produce for the week. His voice a low murmur on the phone. Julianne was at the front counter going over receipts, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. She wore a simple linen dress, and her hair was tied back with a stray curl escaping to frame her face. A young woman walked in hesitantly. She was in her early 20s, her eyes wide and a little lost. She clutched a worn backpack to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this the hearth?" Julianne looked up, her smile warm and welcoming. "It is. Can I help you?" The young woman took a hesitant step forward. I heard about this place. I heard about the chef." She wrung her hands nervously. "I'm trying to be a cook, but I didn't go to any fancy schools, and everyone tells me I don't have what it takes." Julianne's expression softened. She came around the counter and stood in front of the young woman. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Anna." "Well, Anna," Julianne said, placing a hand on her arm, "let me tell you a story about a man who made potato soup and changed the world." She led her to a small table and sat down, her voice low and steady as she began to recount the tale of a line cook with calloused hands and a heart full of love, of a lonely judge who had forgotten how to taste hope, and of a little girl who knew that sunflowers always find the light. As she spoke, Leo came out from the back and stood watching from a distance. He didn't interrupt, he just listened, a proud smile on his face. He was no longer just a man who cooked food, he was a story, a legend, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And as Julianne finished her story, and Anna looked up, her eyes shining with newfound determination, Leo knew that the hearth was more than a restaurant. It was a legacy. It was a testament to the fact that the most extraordinary things can grow from the simplest of beginnings, and that a life built on love will always be the most nourishing meal. Of all, the sun was setting, casting a warm alpenglow over the city. The windows of the hearth glowed like embers, inviting and safe. Inside, the last of the dinner, guests were lingering over dessert, their laughter a soft melody that filled the room. Leo stood in the open kitchen, his arms crossed as he watched the scene unfold. He saw a young couple on a first date, their hands nervously brushing as they reached for the same piece of bread. He saw a family celebrating a birthday, their faces lit by the candles on a small cake. He saw an elderly man sitting alone reading a book, a small smile on his face. Each table held a different story, a different life, but they were all connected by the simple act of sharing a meal in this place he had built with his own two hands. Julianne came and stood beside him, her arms slipping around his waist. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her gaze following his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking about how lucky I am." She smiled. "Me too." They stood in comfortable silence while watching the life of their restaurant unfold. It was a life they had created together, a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a life that was real, you know. Julianne said, her voice thoughtful. "For years I chased success. I thought it was about accolades and acquisitions, about being the best, the most powerful, but I was wrong." She looked up at him, her eyes full of a deep and abiding love. "Success isn't about what you build for yourself, it's about what you build for others. It's about creating a space where people feel seen, where they feel nourished, where they feel like they belong." Leo kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "I think you just defined the hearth," he said. Maya came bounding down the stairs from their apartment, her face bright with the energy of youth. "Mom, Dad, can we go get ice cream?" she asked, her eyes pleading. Julianne and Leo looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Then they both smiled. "Of course," Leo said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Let me just grab my coat." As the three of them walked out of the restaurant and into the cool evening air, Leo looked back at the warm, glowing windows of the hearth. He had started this journey with nothing but a dream and a desperate hope. But he had found so much more. He had found a home, a family, and a love that was as nourishing and life-sustaining as the food he cooked. It was a love that had taught him that the greatest feasts are not the ones served on silver platters, but the ones shared with a full heart. And in the end, that was the only recipe that truly mattered.